On phenomenological field, Hedwig Conrad Martius is most known by her work Real-ontology, which was published in 1923 in the yearbook to Phenomenology of Edmund Husserl. What reality means in Conrad Martius will be clear already from her work Zur Ontologie der Erscheinungslehre der realen Außenwelt, which argues that the real foundation of the outside world. Can you hear me?
Yes.
But is first revealed in the temporal constitution of it. Conrad Martius' inquiry focuses in this work on the transition from the real existence of the thing to the constituted reality of it, and raises the question of how it is possible to understand the real existence of the reality in itself if it is first revealed for the consciousness as a constituted reality. I quote, "The fact, however, that it is possible to subvert it in this way, that in place of what is truly real, a habitus that appears real can be pushed into place, that not only makes those skeptical questions meaningful, but also makes doubt at the same time in a possible answer to the epistemological question of reality, and thus in a possible dissolution of the whole skepticism." End of quote. In this work, Conrad Martius distinguishes between the idealistic, fantasized condition of the thing that constitutes a link to reality and the real reality, so to say, which has its own real existence independently from the existence of the thing. Conrad Martius' aim, especially in her later work about real-ontology, is to reveal the distinction between the reality constituted by the reflective act on the thing as opposed to the subjective reality of the constituted thing. At the same time, real ontology is a strong critic against the Husserlian phenomenology and especially against Husserl's work, The Ideas, and it shows Conrad Martius' strong involvement in the contemporary thinking about Husserlian phenomenology. According to Conrad Martius, the present appearance of the thing is bestowed by the outside world also when it does not have any reality in itself. Even if the phenomena of the fantasy does have a real connection to the reality of the outside world, and this fact proves its independent existence from the real outside world, which allows a definition of it that is independent of the intentional thing, the existence of the fantasy proves that the reality is revealed in every constituted thing. The existence of the reality that is revealed in every reductional act is not equivalent with the idealistic construction of the thing, but with the reality in itself. Therefore, the aim of real ontology is to disclose the complex relationship between the reality of itself and Conrad Martius' idea, that is the subjective expectation of reality. To better understand what she means under the distinction of the subjective or idealistic interpretation of the reality and the reality itself, it must be taken into consideration that Conrad Martius juxtaposes the constitutional act of the experiencing and the act of creation as the manifestation of God's existence. She explains these parallel acts by the idealistic realistic existence of the experiencing. The real form of the triangle, for example, manifests in the bodily existence of it, which at the same time holds the essential character of the geometric form. The unique appearance of this essential feature constitutes the Washeit of the thing that carries the essential character of the triangle in itself. However, the what of the thing is the porter of its essential form. It is not a hypokaimenon, the independent existence of reality. Conrad Martius asserts that the what of the thing and the moment of the constitution of reality create the identical unity of the thing. Regarding this argumentation, two questions inevitably arise. Firstly, whether there is a parallel realization of the constitutional act of reality and of the divine act of creation, and, in this sense, is reality based on the subjective act, that is, the existence of the subject is the precondition of the reality. Secondly, whether the precedence of the subject is not the precedence of the ideal existence of the thing at the same time, and therefore the existence of God as the pure reality is a paradox of the creation and the creator at the same time. Real being exists independently of the constitutional act. However, the constitutional act is preconditional for its existence. The ontology of reality is in this sense the theory of reality that reflects on the phenomenological act of creation by which reality manifests in the real existence of the thing. Otherwise, this manifestation is the border of reality. This is the transition from the experience of reality to the real existential being. I quote from Konrad Martius's Real-ontology. Therefore, the revelation of God is at the same time born of reality by the creation as the precondition of phenomenological thinking. Discloses itself as the reality in itself in the real existential being. This is the gate of being, which is not the precondition but the main possibility of being. The precondition of real being is the act of creation, which is the divine decision for the possibility of reality. End of quote. If, as just said, the meaning and goal of real ontology is to uncover the essential basic constituents of real being, that is, everything that real being in its manifold forms differently establishes and allows to emerge from itself, then all real ontological moments imply real being. That is the most peculiar situation. As Konrad Martius wrote in Real-ontology, we stand in front of the gate of reality, so to speak, at which it not yet is, but is starting. At this point, the basic constitution of being in general, in which the only ideal is included, which can still be grasped in an empty and formal generality, transforms itself into realistic or the basis of reality. And it is precisely this moment of transformation that we need to create, where we have radically overcome merely formal positing, but the factual one is not yet present. End of quote. The ability of changing is the consequence of the created being who is bestowed with its reality. Regarding the existence of reality, Konrad Martius' second consideration is the spatial temporal dimension of the real being. The fact of the possibility of changing concludes in the consequences of the spatial temporal dimension of the real being. That is, the real being manifests in the bodily form, and its precondition is the reality in the spatial temporal dimension. God's immanent reality and the creation of the world happen simultaneously and are inseparable, but human thinking cannot imagine the unity of creator and the creation in pure action. However, when the immanent reality of God is the final gate of every real manifestation in the spatial temporal dimension, then this is the gate of the spatial temporal dimension, which is the ontic manifestation of its own reality. The second part of my presentation is about the phenomenological origin of the soul's reality, Konrad Martius' influences on Yiddish time. It is obvious from the beginning that in Konrad Martius' thinking, the real existence of the soul is revealed by way of the bodily experience, which can be separated into a mental cognition of the experience and the temporal fixing of it in the memory. In this interpretation, the memory means more than the cognitive perception of the experience. It is moreover the pre-ontological basis of the experiences that conveys the formal constitution of potentially each experience. In this sense, Coran Matthews distinguishes in her work Design the pre-reality of the soul's contribution to the real experiences. I quote, "The current reality is opposed to the potential reality, the total reality to the pre-reality. The soul or psyche, in the sense meant here, belongs to pre-reality. It is the principle that lies in the entire constitution of man and even of animals. Personal nature. Through the personal soul principle, the human totality is shaped toward what it is in terms of body, soul, and spirit. Since it is fundamentally actualizing principle, it can only be pre-real, more precisely, super-real. It is intellectual." End of quote. Though Coran Matthews never uses the notion of the memory for the meaning of the soul, her interpretation displays the preliminary role of the memory at the individual experiences as the temporary relation. Therefore, the soul is phenomenologically the gate to reality because it is the preliminary existing material of every experience. Regarding the previous interpretation, different aspects of Coran Matthews' thinking had a significant influence on Erich Stein's thinking. Especially in her later writing and precisely in Finite and Eternal Being, Stein refers to the early works of Coran Matthews and put them in contrast to Heidegger's phenomenological thinking about temporality. Remarkable is the fact that while Stein mostly emphasizes the Heideggerian influence on her habilitation, potency, and act, she introduces Conrad Matthews' thinking in Finite and Eternal Being as the contrasting approach besides Heidegger's to the problem of temporality. Stein argues at the beginning of her book with the temporal horizon of finite being comprehended by the present activity of the consciousness. She talks about the moment of the experience that extends to the eternal situation of experiencing by fitting the experience into the memory. I quote, "This means not only that past and future have an epistemological existence in memory and expectation, an essay in intellectu, sive in memoria, but that the actually present being of the moment is not conceivable as existing by itself in isolation. As a point doesn't exist apart from a line, so the moment doesn't exist apart from some temporal extension or duration. Or we may picture the actual present as the crest of a wave, which itself is part of a mighty stream." End of quote. Quoting Conrad Matthews, Stein explains the temporal being by the atemporal dimension of the experience's actuality and asserts that the human being can realize his temporal existence only through the actuality of the experience. I quote, "In other words, my present being contains in itself the possibility or potentiality, möglichkeit of future actual being, and presupposes a possibility or potentiality in my former being. My present being is simultaneously actual and potential being, and insofar as it is actual, it is the concrete realization of a possibility which antecedes my present actuality. This means then that actuality and potentiality and as modes of being are implicit in the simple fact of being, Seinstatsache, and can be deduced from it." End of quote. This transition from the potentiality to the actuality manifests in Stein's interpretation receives both a spiritual and a material position in the human existence and mediates as the material carrier between the possible and the actual life. The idiom of the unformed material originates from Conrad Matthew's phenomenological notion that characterizes the position of the soul as the carrier between the possible and the real being. I quote from Conrad Matthew's design. From here, we see that the soul belongs to a completely different ontic layer than body and mind. Understanding this is of great importance, especially from the structure of the human being. We finally come to the great duality that plays such a decisive role in the Aristotelian Thomistic ontology, that of potency and act. Body and mind have their place in fully constituted current being. End of quote. In Conrad Matthew's sense, the psychical aspect reveals the experiences of the temporal dimension, and this mediates between final and eternal being. Stein touches upon Conrad Matthew's view in finite and eternal being when she explains the phenomenological importance of the soul during the recalling of experiences. This mental act links the actuality of the experience with the temporal reflection on it and discloses the relationships between finitude and eternity. Actually, her argument for the possibility of the phenomenologically clarified temporality aims to verify the existence of the soul by the transition of being from potentiality to actuality. Certainly, Stein adopted the phenomenological view of Conrad Matthews that the act of the soul is fulfilled in the temporal reflection on the atemporal dimension of life. In finite and eternal being, Stein explains the role of the soul in the memorial experience that endows the memory with an eternal character by way of interpreting existence in terms of its possible form. Stein's approach to the soul is quite the opposite as that of Conrad Matthews when she sets out from the phenomenological interpretation of the scholastic potence act terms and explains the manifestation of the individual being by the experience of the actual being as an actuality. In this sense, the existence of the soul is not just a hypothesis about the origin of the human being's realization, but this composes the individual character of the human existence, and in this sense, it connects both to the real action and contains the unchanging form of the individual. The identic form of the soul warrants the connection between the real experiences and the temporary reflection on them, while the individual I constitutes an ideal relationship between the actual experience and the memory of it. The essentially similar forms of the actual experience and the idealistic constitution of it are separated by their existential characters. That is, the temporary determined character of the present experience on the one hand, and the atemporal existence of the ideal thing in the memory, on the other hand, have the same essential form as creations. Stein explains this by the existential being of the ego. As the carrier of the experience and being carried by the experiences, the ego contributes both to the material and the formal existence of the final being. According to Stein's thesis, the twofold existence of the ego, possessing its existence in the momentary actuality on the one hand, and living in the permanence of the memory on the other hand, discloses the understanding of the eternal being as the foundation and ground of the final existential being. Regarding the definition of the phenomenological temporality, Stein sets out from the common phenomenological body-soul-mind trinity and argues for the temporality by the punctual experience of eternity. In this sense, she completely connects to Konrad Martius's thesis about the relationship between temporality and eternity. However, she characterizes the mental spiritual reflection on temporality and the finitude of the subject by the individual character of the soul. In Stein's interpretation, the soul is the essence of the special material living form, that is, the soul has an autonomous and ontic expansion independently but in relation to the bodily expansion. This means that the autonomy of the soul is revealed in the spatial and temporal dimension. The soul's participation in the real existential being constituted in the coincidence between the transcendentizing and the individual ego is revealed in the atemporal dimension as the idealistic realization of final being. The soul is, in this sense, the idealistic appearance of the finitude, that is, the real existence of the soul is disclosed in its atemporal dimension as the final existence's eternal horizon. Thank you.